Joel, I have 1790.
All right, let's call the meeting to order. Thank you for your patience. We've got several items to take up. The first two are local and privates that were doubly referred to appropriations. I'm going to recognize Senator Delano to explain House Bills 1516 and 1517.
Yes, sir. We'll take both of these in a block if you're okay with that. Ladies and gentlemen, this
motion is to take them up in block. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Okay, Senator Delano, you proceed.
Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, this is a legacy retirement fund for the city of Biloxi. Back in the 90s, they switched over to PERS, and in their old plan, their legacy plan, there are 84 members or benefactors to this plan, and they are unable, the city is unable to use their city dollars to provide cost of living increases. So all we're doing is striking some language. That's on line 316 or 317 of House Bill 1516 and line 367 of House Bill 1517. That's an explanation of the bill, and I'll be glad to yield it for any questions.
Senator Delano, this involves no state appropriations, correct?
No state appropriations at all.
Okay. Any other questions by committee members?
The motion of title sufficient do pass, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The motion is title sufficient do pass. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Next is House Bill 1782. Senator Bryan still here? Oh, there you are, Senator Bryan. I'll recognize Senator Bryan to explain House Bill 1782.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be in the Appropriations Committee, and I feel like spending money already. The bill that's before you is the amount of money from the COVID funds that were allocated to healthcare. I learned late in the day that the Public Health Committee was to work on this proposition, and even later in the day that the total amount available would be $130 million. The House had a proposition that was not the same as the Senate proposition, and so what you see before you is, of course, a combination of the two. I would just say initially that my philosophy in dealing with this was to get as much money as we could out in the hinterlands to the individuals across the state who are actually having trouble, who are actually trying to deal with the COVID situation, and to get money out to where it would be spent on the ground and not eaten up by administrative costs and not being spent studying problems, but actually trying to do something. The hospitals have needs far greater than what we can meet, but the amount of money allocated to hospitals is $80 billion. So when you subtract 80 million from 130, you'll find that you've got 50 million left for everything else. The way the bill works, more or less, is that in order to be eligible for any of this money, you have to have expenses that are reimbursable under the CARES Act, so that it's legal for us to do this under federal law. The hospitals have a cap, and the cap is based on a formula which is 50% the number of licensed beds and 50% the number of COVID patients that they were actually treating in the facility as of one day last week. That was a formula the House was very taken with. It's not my favorite formula, but there we are. Those figures under the formula will act as a cap, and the hospital still must show that they've actually got expenses in that amount. After hospitals, there's a amount of money that is to go to individual entities, to doctors, dentists, optometrists, go to surgery centers, assisted living facilities, Alzheimer's units, intermediate care facilities for those with intellectual disabilities, ambulances, and so on. For each of these entities, there's a cap, again, trying to do some sort of rough justice, trying to deal with the burdens that these various entities had, which of course is, first of all, impossible, and secondly, we don't have enough money to do what we need to do anyway. So what we did was provide for a cap of $4,000 for surgery centers, assisted living centers, dementia units, dentists. We have a cap of $2,500 for physicians, optometrists, those in that category. A cap of $5,000 for each ambulance, and $10,000 for each intermediate care facility and each nursing home. That took up a good bit of the money, trying to get money to the independent people that were dealing with this. The definitions exclude anyone who's really owned by a hospital, and there's an amendment that we need that I can offer here on the floor to have a cap of 10 times that amount for any one facility, so that we're taking the available money and best we can, getting it to the folks who were sort of caught without other resources. Then there are some other propositions. I'll talk about the ones that were basically Senate propositions first, to send up to $4,000 for or to on the benefit of a food pantry, and to send money to nonprofits not to exceed $4,000. The idea is their food pantries have been overwhelmed with the demand, and we assume this is going to get worse. The thought about nonprofits is, if each of us will think about our districts, you know, there are a lot of people in your district on the ground helping folks that are doing stuff. These tend to be small nonprofits that aren't clever enough to get involved in whatever it is that's going on down here. So for both of those propositions, the money was sent to community foundations with the idea that the community, based on population, with the idea that the community foundations were A, good, well-organized, legitimate institutions, and B, they could handle getting money out most efficiently and most properly in their own areas, about as good as anyone else could. Community foundations are people like the Jackson Community Foundation, which I believe now is in Mississippi, the Community Foundation for Mississippi, Create, Northwest Mississippi Foundation. The 7 of them statewide have met few years ago, and more or less divided the state up into 7 areas, so that there's one community foundation that has responsibility for every county in the state. And looking at how you're going to administer a bunch of really small grants all over the place, this seemed the way to do it. I'll just say this, it's useful for me to think about what money means back home. The figures we use down here are too theoretical for me. So we've got 3 million people in the state. We're talking about $4 million. Roughly, that figures out to $1 per person for each of these programs, or a little bit more. So if you think of the population of your county and go a little bit more than $1 per person, that's a rough idea of how much money ought to be going to your county for to help with food pantries, and how much ought to be going to your county to deal with nonprofits. we had testimony from a food pantry who said that there is a problem of all things in getting food which is available here in Jackson actually delivered. And so this makes it flexible enough that if that is the problem, they can use money to pick up the food in Jackson, this being perishable food, take it to sites around the states where the local food pantries can get to it. There's also $3,000 for child care facilities to buy protection gear for them around the state. There are a number of statewide organizations. This fund goes specifically to the North Mississippi Education Consortium. That entity has associates that cover the state, and the language makes clear that this is to be distributed statewide on an equitable basis. But you can imagine the trouble child care facilities, many of whom are small and sort of low budget operations, are having dealing with all of this. The bill also provides that $1.5 million will be distributed to federally qualified health centers. There is a magnet community health disparity program which is operated by a group of FQHCs in the Jackson Delta region, more or less. They have an ongoing program to deliver health care. I've looked at their budget, and it seems to me that a large amount of this money is going for individuals who are employed on the ground out in the communities, taking care of people. That was a House proposition. We have two particular, well, let me say also there's $100,000 going to each community mental health center. We have two particular hospitals that are in odd situations. One is McGee, which did not get the $4 million that every other community hospital in the state got. Every other hospital in the state was guaranteed $4 million in an early round of money for Congress. Through a quirk of timing, they were in bankruptcy court. They didn't get the $4 million, and so we're sending $1 million to them, specifically trying to help out because of that. There's a hospital in Senatobia that is currently closed. There is the notion that it would reopen. If the hospital in Senatobia can get reopened by October the 1st, or there's an indication that they're about to, then they would get this $2 million. Otherwise, if that's not going to happen, this $2 million goes back into the pot and is distributed to hospitals on the same basis that the $80 million was. There is $1.8 million for scholarships to help physicians who are going to serve medical areas, rural areas, pay for medical school. And there is $4 million to be used for 5 specific hospitals which have residency programs for physicians. These are hospitals in Mississippi. It's thought that if we can get doctors to do their residencies in Mississippi, maybe they'll get caught and stay here. That's an explanation of the bill.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Any questions of Senator Bryan? Senator Jackson. Yes, sir. You know, we had a summary sheet that was almost done earlier. I certainly can have it available for the floor where we can show all the itemization of all the CARES Act. In fact, I'll ask staff to get that ready so when we can bring it up on the floor, you'll know, before we vote on any of these, we'll know how much money is being spent, or at least proposed to be spent on each of these items, assuming we pass them here in committee. Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? If not, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to offer that amendment on the floor or here, or?
Senator Bryan, I think we would do that on the floor, and the reason I'm thinking that is because there's a proposed, a possible amendment that I understand may be coming through the legal staff, so we may have 2 amendments, yours and another one, so I thought.
If you let the lawyers get a hold of it, there'll never be the end of amendments.
Yeah, I thought it.
You know how they are.
it might be easier to just do them both at the same time when we get to the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate being allowed to appear before the Appropriations Committee.
And thank you for all your hard work
Do
on
I
this.
get money?
Senator Bryan. You get some money. There's a lot in here. Are you a hospital? Senator Polk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions. The hospital in McGee that was in bankruptcy, is it out of bankruptcy at this time?
Yes, it's operating.
And the hospital that was closed but may open, I know the CARES money, I think, is supposed to be for expenses. This will be a legal transfer to that hospital?
Yes, the bill has a overall a provision that all of this money has to be legal under the CARES Act.
Okay, thank you.
So you've got to cover several hurdles. Number one, you've got to be legal under the CARES Act, have sufficient expenditures there, and then number two, you hit the cap that we have.
Thank you.
Motion is title sufficient to pass. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. That bill will be reported. Next is House Bill 1784. Very simple bill, but Senator Seymour has already recognized for, I'll recognize him now for an amendment before we get started.
Mr. Chairman, I move that on line 6 and 7 that the written figure reflect the numerical to be the same.
Okay. The motion would be that the written figure would be $181,775 rather than the $176,500,000 that you see. Any questions about the amendment? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. This is the simplest one we'll have today, and you'll see that the plan is to deposit $181,775,000 with MDES into the Unemployment Compensation Fund. And as most of you know, that fund is being slowly depleted because of the unemployment claims, and so this is an opportunity to help build it back up to keep our employers from having much, if any, of a hit due to the loss ratio. We do have some language in some other bills that will allow us to not include the losses that are occurring during this COVID period in the 3-year span. I think that they consider for the unemployment loss ratio. I think it's called loss ratio or loss experience. And I think we've got a freeze, an executive order freeze on some of the employer contributions at this time. But this is the first step to get some funds back into the unemployment insurance trust fund. Maybe some later, but this is a good first step. Any questions about this? If not, do I hear a motion?
Title sufficient to pass.
The motion is title sufficient to pass. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Next is House Bill 1789. I'll call on Senator Branning to explain the bill.
Chairman, this bill deals with the CARES Act funds for elections, and the funds will be made available to the Secretary of State's office. The total amount in this bill is $1 million on line 116, and it will be used as follows, sort of in two different categories. $254,000 will be allocated for approximately 2,000 additional poll managers statewide, and this will be allocated to the counties based on the number of precincts in that particular county. The balance of the funds, roughly $745,000 on line 35, will be given to the counties for just election expenses in general, in accordance with the CARES Act guidelines. And this language is very flexible on purpose. We don't want to box any counties in. We feel like the needs of one county may not be the needs of another county based on their population and just what they have going on there individually. So can be used for things like more poll managers. If they need more than what the money will provide for in the first round, the $254,000, a county may choose to use this second round of money, if you will, for additional poll managers. The circuit clerks may need to hire temporary help inside their offices during the 45 days prior to the election and then on election day, as well as additional PPE may be needed. And again, all in accordance with the Treasury guidelines for what this money may be used for in general. Also, I bring to the committee's attention, you probably know the Secretary of State has received $4.7 million in a direct appropriation under the CARES Act. And again, for COVID expenses, so there's already a fund there to generate some help for the PPE and the things that we know will be needed on Election Day. So that is the explanation of the bill. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any members have questions of Senator Branning? Not. Senator Brandon, do you have a motion?
Title sufficient to pass.
Motion. Senator Norwood, did you have a question? Okay. Senator Norwood, you're recognized.
Senator Brandon, that this is in regard to the existing polling places that they have.
Correct.
Okay, so there's no opportunity for additional polling places to be to establish and funded using these resources.
That would be up to the counties as to how they would spend the $745,000, as long as it's for election expenses. And I'll tell you, there is a statute, I think we've discussed this at some juncture. There's a statute that does allow for the circuit clerk's offices to open satellite locations. That's existing law. Whether they choose to take any portion of this money and do that would be up to those individual counties. And in consultation with their county board of supervisors, they have to take a look at the CARES Act regulations to make sure that it falls in line with the way this money may be spent.
Thank you, Senator
Thank
Brandon.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Norwood. Senator Branning's motion is title sufficient to pass. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Next is House Bill 1790. I'll recognize Senator Delano.
Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate to take up 1790 and 1791 in a block, since those are two, one's an appropriations bill, the other's a transfer bill?
Yes, the motion is to take up 1790 and 1791 in block. Any questions? If not, all in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Senator Delano, you're recognized to take
Thank
a
you.
vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I'm going to work off of 1791. Just so you know, 1790 is the appropriations bill for the transfer language that I'm getting ready to explain to you in 1791. This is the CARES Act for Tourism Recovery Fund. It's $14 million that will go to local tourism boards across the state. There are 25 DMOs that are established by local and private legislation that derive funds from within their own community. This money would go to those bodies and to those boards based on a formula that is a function of 75% of their annual marketing spend, and then also another component of it will be for the visitors, the visitorships and how many visitors come to that area based off of the report that we received in 2019 from the DMOs and from the Mississippi Tourism Association. The money can be used for marketing and advertising groups. We have to be able to communicate to the people that we are in a post-pandemic world, that we're safe, and that we've taken protective measures for people that are coming to travel to our area. This legislation does comply with the Treasury guidance that have come down regarding CARES Act for tourism marketing. And this is very similar to the Back to the Business grant program that we did a couple of weeks ago. This uses CARES Act money to get back to helping local businesses. This also amends the MTA's Marketing Advisory Board, and it will add representatives from that are appointed by the governor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, and the speaker's office to make sure that we have a consistency in messaging across the state. And then there's also some language that will allow for making sure that all of the expenditures are consistent with what is in this particular bill. We also have $1 million that will go to a museum recovery fund for museums across the state. This will help with cleaning, disinfecting, and other health and safety issues. And the museums will be able to apply for this through DFA for their assistance. Mr. Speaker, or I just did that again, didn't I? Mr. Chairman.
Has anybody got the thumb?
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield for questions.
All right.
It's a long day.
Okay. Anybody have any questions of Representative Delano?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I so deserve that. If there are no other questions, I'll move title sufficient to pass committees, or strike all, excuse me. Title sufficient to pass, strike all.
Motion is title sufficient to pass, strike all. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Those both strike alls. I didn't look back at 1790, but yes. Thank you, Senator Representative Delano. Well, moving on. Moving on to House Bill 1792, I'll recognize Senator DeBar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1792 is a strike all. This is the funding mechanism for the Distance Learning Act that we passed earlier. We'll be taking up later this afternoon in Senate Bill 3044. This will put $150 million into the Equity and Distance Learning Fund to fund the distance learning projects that we talked about earlier in the session, and that will be taken up this afternoon. I'll yield for any questions, Mr. Chairman. If none, title sufficient to pass, strike all.
Motion is title sufficient to pass, strike all. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Next, we'll move to House Bill 1794, and I will recognize Senator Fillingane. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a pleasure to be here. 1794 is the funding mechanism or appropriations bill for House Bill 1793, which Chairman Rita Parks presented and passed, I think, yesterday or the day before. This one deals with the funding, the COVID funding for IHL and community and junior colleges. So it's a very simple appropriations bill. Hopefully you remember the more detailed explanation Senator Parks gave yesterday of all the inner workings of 1793, but it's $110 million. So it's $50 million for the community colleges, $50 million for the IHL institutions, and then there's another $10 million that MDA will administer grants for other, I think, K through 12 schools actually, that somehow got into this bill that deals with like PPE and things of that nature that they can apply to MDA for grants for those types of issues. Now 1793 has a much more intricate formula of, once you break down beneath the 50 million for IHL, for instance, it's based on the full-time student enrollment as of March the 1st of 2020, and it breaks down to roughly $568 per student actively enrolled in each of those IHL institutions. And in 1793, it actually has a breakdown of each of our IHL institutions. So Alcorn State is set to receive $1,854,520. Delta State, $1,946,536. Jackson State University, $3.6 million. I'm rounding off here a little bit. Mississippi State University, $11.7 million. Mississippi University for Women, $1.5 million. Mississippi Valley State University, $1.1 million. The University of Mississippi, $11.9 million. University of Southern Mississippi, $7.3 million. Belhaven University, $2.2 million. Blue Mountain College, $340,000. Millsaps College, $433,000. Mississippi College, $2.4 million. Russ College, $364,000. Tougaloo College, $397,000. And William Carey University, $2.4 million. So that's the breakdown of the universities. Then when you go over to the community college bracket, it's very similar in nature. It has a $545.42 per full-time equivalent for the students at each of the 15 community colleges across the state. So based on the size of those community colleges, you multiply that out times the number of students times that formula, and you get, and I'm not going to go through all 15 of them unless you want me to, but it's roughly between 1.1 million to the largest one, looks like Hinds County is like 4.9 million. So that's roughly how that goes. There is $1 million in that bucket that goes to the Mississippi Community College Board. And then I think on the IHL version, there's $130,000 the IHL board office asked for PPE and things of that nature. So that's the rough breakdown. I do have an amendment, Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time on 1794, because in all of the rush last night and all the drafting, I think there was a decision made in 1793 by those writing that bill that the Department of Finance Administration would be the entity that oversees and doles out these dollars, whereas on 1794, the version you have before you actually has the Board of Trustees of State Institutions for Higher Learning Office of Student Financial Aid as a designated entity to oversee the doling out of the funds. And talking with Kim Gillespie and others involved in that process, they just felt like, this would be a better mechanism because they don't need to hire additional people to oversee this one-time disbursement of monies, and so the DFA would be the better entity for that. And I believe we made provisions in the bill for like $50,000 for the administrative cost of that for DFA.
50,000?
I believe that's what it was.
Okay. So the amendment that you would be proposing, before I ask for questions, the amendment would be to move it to DFA in this bill to correspond with what you have in 1793, and then also
Yes.
to include 50,000.
No, it's already, the amount is already in here.
Okay, all right.
I'm just trying to remember the exact amount that was worded, but we don't need to change that. It was already made provisions for in the bill. The only amendment we're asking is that instead of the Institutions of Higher Learning, Office of Student Financial Aid, and through the Community College Board, that we replace all those references as far as administration of these funds to the Department of Finance and Administration throughout.
Okay, before, we'll go ahead and take up the amendment then. Any questions on the amendment proposed by Senator Fillingham? If not, or he can't make the motion. Do I have a motion from a member? Thank you, Senator Blackwell. Motion is to amend to change the IHL Student Financial Aid Office to Department of Finance and Administration. All in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Now back on the bill. Any questions of Senator Fillingham? If not, is there a motion? Motion.
Sufficient do pass.
Motion, title sufficient, do pass, strike all. All in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Senator Fillingham. Appreciate your assistance with that. Moving on to House Bill 1797, we'll ask Senator Delano again to explain this one.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the committee, just a few minutes ago on the floor, we talked about the Mississippi Broadband Availability Grant Program for $50,000. This is the appropriations bill for that puts $50 million to the Department of Education to conduct this program. That's an explanation of the appropriations bill. And I'll move for title sufficient do pass if there's not any questions.
Any questions? Senator Jackson?
50 million. I may have said 50,000, but 50
I
million.
think you did say 1,000, but it is 50 million. Any other questions?
Motion will be title sufficient do pass.
Motion is title sufficient, do pass. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Senator Delano. Next, we'll go to Senator Hill, House Bill 1799.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1799 is the enabling mechanism for the funds for cities and counties to be transferred from the Budget Contingency Fund over to MEMA, COVID-19 fund, for providing reimbursements to cities and counties for their COVID expenditures. And the amount on line 17 is $70 million. And we were able to reduce that amount because with using MEMA, they can use this money for their FEMA match. So there is one amendment that I need to make in the bill that was just basically an oversight on line 19. On the administrative side, the Senate Bill 3047 had $500,000 for administrative fees to be held out of the amount of funds, and we need to amend that from $200,000 to $500,000 so those bills will match. So
Okay.
I would like to
Move that amendment.
move that amendment.
You heard the amendment proposal by Senator Hill, to change $200,000 for administrative fees to $500,000. Any questions? There are none. All in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Senator Hill. Now back on the bill.
Back on the bill. Do I have any questions? And if I don't have any questions, I would ask title sufficient do pass, strike all.
Any questions? Any questions? The motion is title sufficient, do pass, strike all. All in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Senator Hill. Next, we'll move to our final bill, which is House Bill number 1800, and I'll call on Senator Carter to explain that bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the Connectivity Act that we passed a couple of days ago. It's very simple. This money for these two different grant programs go to DFA. There's $65 million that goes to the Mississippi Electric Cooperatives Broadband COVID-19 Grant Program, and then there's 10 million that goes to the COVID-19 Broadband Provider Grant Program. That's what this does, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions of Senator Carter? Motion is title sufficient to pass, strike all. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. That bill will be reported. I think that is it. I think we will have, at least on the health bill, we'll have an amendment or two for that one, and on the floor. And let me see if I'm forgetting anything else so we don't have to come back for. Okay, may have one other one, but I think at this time I'll entertain a motion to rise and report.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is our last meeting.
Not necessarily, we may have one more.
Okay, well, before that, just wanted to say, I'll take the opportunity to say thank you.
You're recognized to speak.
Thank you, I'm sorry. Thank you as chairman for all the work that you've done. This has been extra duty this session, and what the staff and Missy and Chris and everybody's done, it's been a great job. So just wanted to extend that thank you for what you've done on this.
Thank you. Well, look, the thanks goes to all the people that have been working so hard to get all this done. This has been an extraordinary year, and I'm grateful for both members and staff for dealing with all the stuff we've had to do and the extra work. But thank you for the comment, Senator Wiggins. And with that, motion.
Rise and report.
All in favor, say aye.